Well, good day. We're joined by Terry Aberhart with Aberhart Farms, and wanted to talk to Terry a little bit about BioSul and his experiences with BioSul today. So, Terry, tell us, when did you first apply BioSul on your farm?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm pretty sure it was 2015 was the first year. Let me think about this. Yeah, because we would have had our fifth year was actually a year ago, I think. So maybe it was 2014. I have to think about that. But yeah, it's been a while. We were probably the first ones to apply in Saskatchewan, anyways, with BioSol, and been working with it for quite a while now with our farm and with some of our clients through our agronomy business as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that was really the reason I wanted to talk to you today, was because to my knowledge, you were the first person to apply BioSol on a field in Saskatchewan. And so you'd be a great person to deal with this issue of how long does it last and what can we get out of it. So yeah, so 2019 would have been year 5 on the very first fields that were applied, right? So as you've gone through these, I guess 6 years now of applying BioSol, what has been your general program on your farm and your approach as far as what fields get BioSol and when, and what rates have you been going?
Yeah, so previous to BioSol, we were on an elemental program as well with Tiger 90s. So really what we've done is typically when we first look to apply BioSol is usually on a year that we're going to grow canola on that field is usually where we start, but not always. If we take on some new land and it hasn't been done yet, we'll just do it all just to kind of keep it in blocks. But essentially we kind of want to get into that where we're rotating a certain portion of the farm every year. But yeah, ideally it's nice to get that when you're doing a multi-year application, and canola is a crop that typically does use more sulfur to start that way. But essentially we just look at what makes sense to build into our rotation and the times that we want to reapply and just eventually get the whole farm covered. So it's and try to spread out that cost kind of so it's not all, you're not getting all of the farm bill in 1 year and then not having to spend anything for the next 5 years, which is fine, but maybe a little bit hard on your cash flow.
Yeah, for sure. And what kind of rates have you been going with the BioSol in your program?
Yeah, so we've been going at the 220 rate initially, especially if there hasn't been any kind of bridge strategy. We normally at times as well do utilize the VR aspect of it, just simply on a couple basis with higher yielding areas will typically require more sulfur, and the lower yielding areas usually are lower areas of the field too, which the sulfur leaches down there and typically have higher levels as well. So we'll do a little bit of variable rate there where we'll jack up the rate maybe 10 or 20% in those knolls and hilltops where there be maybe a little bit of leaching go on over time, and then same thing, maybe reduce 20% in the lower areas of the field. But and then when we've been looking to reapply now, depending on the situation and what you do, we'll either go 5 years or go into like a 3-year program or a little bit shorter rotation, just to kind of, if rented land maybe or whatever the scenario may be, we have been doing some kind of 3-year rates now on reapplications depending on the situation.
Okay, great. So based on all your experiences, what's your guidance for growers who have applied BioSul and are, say, in year 2021 coming up here? They're in year 5. What's your guidance for them on, should they be concerned? Should they look at putting canola on that ground, or should they look at a different crop? Should they look at supplemental sulfur? What's your guidance based on all your experience?
Yeah, well, my brother would always bug me because as an agronomist, a lot of times I say, well, it depends, right? And he always says, as agronomists, we all say that all the time. But yeah, generally speaking, this will depend a bit on your yields and the crop rotation and those kind of things. But typically here we're pretty close to a canola cereal, canola, kind of rotation. There's some pulses in there too, but typically we are a little bit of a heavier canola rotation. And so in the first 5 years, we obviously watched this stuff really closely with tissue tests to see how it compared to what we were doing in the past and how long it would last and ensure that we're not running out. And simply, we shared some data last year at the Aberhart Ag Summit with the dealers, but our tissue test levels have been strong all the way through the 5 years and all the crops and all the fields and different kinds of rotations. So, and probably stronger than what we've seen before on our other elemental programs. So I have no qualms about feeling confident the sulfur is going to be there that you need in what we've experienced. And we did start to see just a slight drop off in that 5th year. Still levels are really good in canola and ratios and those kind of things, but did start seeing them drop off just a little bit, which to me probably is a sign that, yeah, maybe it is time to reapply. I wouldn't be worried from what I've seen to have canola on that 5th year. If for some reason your tissues were trending low on the 4th year or starting to drop down, I would, maybe think about that a bit. And also it depends on your rotation. So as an example for us this year, we had some land that was ready to be reapplied, but our rent renews on it next year and it's going into wheat this year. And so we're probably just going to hold off and reapply next year when our rent renews and it's going into canola. I'm pretty sure, well, it's important to have sulfur for your wheat too. I'm pretty sure we'll have enough carryover there that it won't be an issue in the wheat crop. Now, if it was going into canola, I would probably reapply it, because the last thing you want to do is shoot yourself in the foot on that year when you're going to put 60 bushel canola into the bank and you didn't have enough sulfur there to get there, right? If the conditions are right. So, but if you've had, and I guess another thing to add to that that's important to know, over the last 5 years on our farm, we've had like some of the best yields we've ever had. And our average has been really strong. So out of all those 5 years, we haven't had like a really low or below average production year. This year was, closer to average or a little bit below average due to some dryness and stuff like that. So, that's what we experienced with really strong yields all the way through. Now, if you were in a drought area, had some below average yields, that might mean that you could maybe stretch it out another year. I don't know if I'd go much beyond 6 years, just I don't really have the experience or the data. And just looking at the math and how everything works is probably not the best idea. But if you're kind of in that situation where maybe you had some less than stellar yields, and or you're going into a crop rotation where sulfur is important, but maybe not as critical as canola, like a cereal or a pulse. Pulse is kind of halfway between your cereal and your canola, right? You could potentially get away with stretching it out another year.
Yeah, the math really does kind of start to, if you look at stretching it to year 6, or if you try to stretch it to 7 years, right? It does save you a few bucks, but you get into the neighborhood of saving $1 or $2, right? Like when you look at that scenario. So you're right. If you're looking at canola crop or something sensitive, I mean, it does get challenging to say, let's try to save $1 or $2. When you look at what the potential loss would be, as if you run short of sulfur by stretching it out too far, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like I think there's a risk reward there, and like I said, in the example for us here going into wheat, I'm not too worried about it. I know we've had a good program, and there'll probably be enough there to support that. But you definitely, I mean, even if it's a bushel an acre of canola, that's a lot of value. So I would be cautious about the risk reward value calculation there to try to stretch it too far and maybe leave 3 bushels on the table that you could have had.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense for sure. Well, last question for you is, especially, you got your farmer hat on with, a lot of experience with BioSul, and you mentioned rent agreements and stuff. What's your program, or what is your guidance to farmers who, have used a lot of BioSul, maybe covered all of their owned land, or maybe some of their really stable owned land plus really stable rented land. And then they look at, the rest of their farm, which might be, a third or a half or 2/3 for some guys. And they look at those acres that are maybe less stable rental agreements. They like the product, it's worked well, but they're just unsure about the 5-year investment and on maybe a 3-year rental or a shorter term rental. What's your guidance for guys in that scenario?
Yeah, there's a few things. First thing I would think about and try to leverage is the fact that you're using BioSul on your farm. I think is a really good story, and something that we should be proud of and want to share. And so I think that strategically we could use that as a negotiating point, working with your landlords to maybe get a 5-year agreement versus a 3-year agreement, to say that, hey, this is part of our practice and it's good for the soil and it's good for the environment and all these wonderful things, and because we're farming this way, it would just be less risk for us to have a longer term agreement, which would be good for you as a farmer, and potentially good for the landlord too. So that's the first thing I would kind of try to position or negotiate, is maybe that's a tool that actually can get you a longer term rental agreement. If that isn't a possibility, then one of the things that we looked at too, one of the first clients that we kind of worked with as well, that was applying BioSul, kind of did the math, and versus ammonium sulfate, he said, well, even in a 3-year rental agreement, I know if I'm putting on a 5-year rate and I only get 3 years, I'm giving up some stuff there. But compared to doing 3 years of ammonium sulfate, it's the same price overall. And I don't have to apply it, that's paying the custom applicator, and I don't have to run all that stuff through my drill. So, and in that standpoint, when you look at the math and the big picture, of course you want to get those additional years, but essentially compared to ammonium sulfate program, they're kind of free. So in his mind, he felt you're still getting the value even in a 3-year program. And then thirdly, I would also at times consider, there hasn't been as much work done on this, but I think that potentially a 3-year rate could be fine. And we've done that now on a few fields for the first time. So we haven't got to the 3rd year yet, so we don't have all that data. But what we've experienced is normally the first year is pretty strong. Like even a lot of our first applications were applied when the canola was actually out of the ground already in the spring of that season, and we still had really great results. So I think there's enough fines and small stuff there that you get that kind of early release. So I think that more work could be done around that 3-year rate, and or doing a 3-year rate that's just maybe a little bit higher than, just splitting it into 3. But kind of manages that risk of the 4th and 5th year if you don't have that rental agreement, right? So those are the 3 different things that we would look at or approach it, and some of the work that we're doing now. So now that we're into the rotations, kind of depending on the land, like some of the land I'm still doing 5 years because it's still probably the most economical in the big picture, but land that maybe we're concerned about the security long term, we might go to the 3-year and match up to our rental agreements on that now moving forward.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, well, thanks a lot for your time. And yeah, like I think you said it well when you said most of these questions, the real answer is it depends, and that resonates with me a lot too. So I guess with that, I would. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I would tell everybody listening, if some of this sparked a question or something, and you want the, how it depends on your specific situation, feel free to reach out to Nolan, Carter, or myself, and we'd be happy to kind of look at your specific scenario and give you our thoughts on that. But really great to hear your experiences, Terry, and to hear how it's worked for you and how you've handled it. And really appreciate your time and all the work you've done.
Yeah, glad to share, and wish you and all your crew and clients the best Christmas over the holidays and the best in 2021.
Thanks. Right back at you.
Awesome.